and now it is going away.
Disney's website says both will be replaced by, quote, the largest expansion in history at the Magic Kingdom, a national park type setting based on the movie Cars. Peter King, CBS News, Orlando.
You may soon see lower prices at the gas pump. 8 members of the OPEC alliance say they will boost oil production by 548,000 barrels per day starting in August. Linda Kenyon, CBS News.
The views and opinions expressed in this show are that of the show hosts, guests, and callers. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the staff and management of Wave 105 FM, Glimpses Media, or any of our partners. As we strive to provide quality, respectful, and engaging content, we welcome you to participate in the conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Wave 105 FM, the sound of Guam. Enjoy the show.
Hi, Hoffa and welcome back to Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin, Wonpat, Borja. I'm from the Commission on Decolonization. This show is brought to you by the Commission on Decolonization and our friends over at Glimpses. And we're back with another couple hours of political status talks on this nice, I still think it's a nice Monday morning. It's a little gloomy out there, but Dice says that the rain needs to relax. Those were her parting words. She's like, and then the rain, you need to decide if you're going to rain or you're not going to rain. Just pick one. I got my rain shoes on. Am I going to need them or not? Guam got some bipolar weather, man. It's like you get all geared up for rain and everything is ready to rock. You got all your waterproof gear and your sweater and everything. And then you get to the office and it's like muggy and gross. It's just humid. You wish you wore shorts and Zori instead. But that's all right. You know, it is what it is, man. It was I hope all of you had a nice, long, restful weekend. Or maybe had to work over the weekend like me. I totally had to work. But this past weekend, we celebrated the 4th of July, America's Independence Day, which is always a fun discussion, in my opinion, for what we talk about. I mean, you gotta kind of have a good sense of humor sometimes about it. It is what it is, man. But I always find it ironic that when we talk about Guam's decolonization and we talk about political self-determination, there's always an audience out there that says that what we're doing is this is anti-American. And especially around this time, right, when we're gearing up to celebrate Liberation Day on Guam. And a lot of times, the Liberation Day ceremony, as many of you know, is very, you ever go down to the parade, it looks like the 4th of July. It's a very patriotic celebration. And, obviously it's understandable. There's a very violent, brutal occupation during the war. And it was, American armed forces that came to bring an end to the war and liberate the island from Japanese rule. But at the same time, it's a lot. It's not as cut and dry as that. Just like anything else, it's a very layered discussion. But I always kind of take exception to the comment that decolonization for Guam, or that Guam's pursuit of a full measure of self-government, is somehow anti-American. I always reference the 4th of July. The Americans also fought for their independence, their political sovereignty. Americans were colonized by the British, and that's where the famous no taxation without representation comes in. That's where that phrase was coined. No taxation without representation. Americans didn't like the idea that they could be taxed by the British but not be, active participants in British government and rule. And so that's essentially what, created the political movement in the United States for them to break off, declare their independence and political sovereignty. And so my response to Guam's decolonization being anti-American is, I mean, you can't really get more American than that. Yeah, these aren't these American pillars of government. I mean, why is it only applicable to some people and not others? I think it's hypocritical. So, I think that it's July 4th is always an excellent time, I think, to have the discussion, to think about this framework. Why do we celebrate the independence of, a nation like the United States from the British, but we can't apply those same principles to the people of Guam? In a lot of ways, the people of Guam also lack meaningful representation in the U.S. system of democracy. Yes, it's true that we use an identical 3-branch system, an American system of representative democracy here locally. And we do have participation in the lower house in the U.S. Congress, but our delegate that we vote for and elect is a non-voting representative. And so, what does that really mean in the bigger scheme of things, right? When you participate in the lower house, what you're doing is you are representing your constituency, right? Your population, and you are voting in line with your voting demographic. So the people who elect you to represent them, you vote with their values in mind. But what happens when your delegate doesn't vote? And what happens when you don't have representation in the upper house? Like a great example, current example is the Trump budget, right? The big, beautiful budget bill, which, if whether you're a proponent or an opponent of it, I think that, that's not really the context of the conversation, right? There's a lot of varying viewpoints on what the bill is actually going to mean for the U.S. system, and of course the territories that are kind of just along for the ride. But one of the big stories was that the bill, was able to pass the Senate, and this is I think bears asking why. What impact does this have on Guam? With no representation in the Senate, I think it's fair to say that territories are just along for the ride. And there's obvious ways that the bill impacts us. We, like many other American jurisdictions, felt the impact of the DEI cuts. And whether you love or hate DEI, I think that, again, that's not what we're debating here. I think what we're debating is, are our views and our values represented when it comes to decisions that affect the entirety of, every single American citizen? Whether you live in a state or in a territory, the budget is something that affects everybody. And so, whatever budget priorities will or won't be have an impact on us. And I think it's always a challenge when we're kind of reduced to a lobbying effort, right? That's like the best that we can do, because we get to go out there and we can lobby. The last, we weren't here last week. We had we allowed the Independence Task Force to sub the show and promote their event, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But the show prior, we had Robert Celestial, who is the lead organizer for PARS, the Pacific Association of Radiation Survivors. And he was on the show talking about the exclusion of Guam in the radiation survivors policy. And basically this Compensation Act, right? Radiation Survivors Compensation Act. And it's troubling, when you think about of course, there are other states that were left out also. And I think it's troubling, if a state can be left out, then it's pretty logical that, territory is going to have a rougher go. But, states are still able to ally with other states and to align votes from other senators and other representatives in Congress. We're over here upset about this glaring exclusion, clearly unjustified exclusion. And we can get upset all we want about it. Shoot, I'm upset. I'm totally upset about it. I'm upset about it. I think our congressional representative can hit a little harder. But, as critical as I can be of our delegate, I have to acknowledge that, our delegate is kind of going into this fight with one hand tied behind his back, maybe both. That's just what it is when you go in to fight for an issue where you don't have a vote, at least a vote that matters on the floor. You can sit on a committee and be a part of the committee deliberations, but, how far does that get you in committee? I mean, the Commonwealth Draft Act was voted on in popular referendum by our people, and that was shot down in committee. Like, that didn't even get a chance to get a vote on the floor. So, obviously we're present during committee deliberations, and we still weren't able to make it past that stage. So, I definitely think that it's a very nuanced discussion. There's no kind of simple answer to any of this, but nonetheless, I think it's an important discussion that we need to have, and we need to be deliberate as a government, as a people, in how we, chart a path forward. So I mentioned earlier that last week we weren't on the air. We allowed the one of the task forces. There's 3 task forces. If you're joining us for the first time, the Commission on Decolonization manages the work of 3 volunteer task forces, one for each legitimate political status option. So there's a task force of volunteers that advocate for voters to choose independence. There's a task force that advocates that voters should choose statehood, and then another one that advocates for voters to choose free association. And so each task force, we recognize these 3 political status options because those are the status options that are recognized also by the international community. They're the only 3 options that would deliver effectively a full measure of self-government to a non-self-governing territory, and effectively remove that territory from the list of non-self-governing territories as recognized by the United Nations. So basically what happens is that each task force is funded by the government, or their educational campaigns are funded by the government. They are an organization of volunteers, so they can't pay themselves or hire somebody within their crew to work for them. Everybody is a volunteer, but their the materials that they would use to educate are funded by the government. So it's a part of something called the Public Information Program, which puts kind of these restrictions on spending, right? So monies that are under the Public Information Program can't be spent, for example, on a salary, can't be spent on travel, but they can be spent on, say, printing brochures or booklets. They can be spent on running promotional events or educational events. They can be used towards outreach. And so, a bunch of the previous task force volunteers have utilized these funds in a lot of different ways. One of the regular things that the Task Force for Independence does is they host an outreach event on the 4th of July every year. And theirs happened this last Friday when we observed the holiday. And their event is called Natlotla, Songs of Freedom. Of course, Natlotla means life in Chamorro. And their whole concept is to celebrate this idea of self-government, and to do it on the 4th of July when the United States is celebrating their Declaration of Independence, or signing of the Declaration of Independence, when they claimed their independence, asserted it, and claimed their political sovereignty. And so the Independence Task Force uses this as a way to engage the community in critical discussion, and they do it around music. So they bring in a bunch of artists who are, local artists that have themes around decolonization or sovereignty or self-government, and they have performances by musicians, by poets, art exhibitions. They have a bunch of vendors that come out, and of course the organization brings their volunteers together. They provide all of their information so that people can take it home and learn more about what Guam would look like under an independent status. Our team goes out. We support all the task force events. So In this case, of course, whenever every year that the Independence Task Force hosts their outreach engagement event, we show up and participate. We provide the political status information on the 3 statuses. We provide the information on the current status, our educational studies on, what are the impacts of different status options on our community, on our system of government. It's a really cool event, and I'm really looking forward to the other task forces putting out their outreach as well. But this is the 8th. This year was the 8th Not Lot Less Songs of Freedom concert, which is a really cool thing, right? That the task force has been active for the last 8 years, and it's consistently put on this event. They even did one during COVID, which was actually really fun. There was, COVID restrictions. So what they did was they booked out the Guam Museum Theater, and they hired a company to film their concert, and they did it as a virtual concert. So they had like live streaming, and then they put out the recordings of all the different segments, which was, it's tough. Obviously you want to, part of the fun of going to a concert is watching the performance live, but when it doesn't happen, you got to have an alternative. And it was awesome that the task force, was still committed to putting on the event, even with the COVID restrictions in place. The event itself was really a lot of fun. Really cool, family-friendly environment. They held it over at the Lime in Antigua, which is a performance venue. It's back there behind the 76. And it's a cool event. Oh, I think we just lost our live stream. 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. We're also streaming live on the COD Instagram. I'm not sure if this thing is working right now, but I'll troubleshoot it later. Anyhow, the event over at the Lime was really a fun one. A lot of families came out, which was really encouraging. There are a lot of folks, even a lot of Chamorros who, are here visiting for the summer months or here for the Liberation festivities. So there's a bunch of Chamorros from the diaspora that came out as well. A lot of cool vendors, great production. The Lime is a cool spot. If you haven't been down there, it's a pretty cool place. It's basically like an event rental venue. So it's like right on the beach. It's got it's an outdoor space, but they got like a nice shaded covering to cover their stage and their audience area. There's like fans everywhere, so they got a nice breeze in there. But yeah, the team that put this on with the Independence Task Force was fantastic. I believe it was the Electric Island Festival, the guys who put on EIF, who won the contract to provide logistics, and they did a fantastic job. Sound, lighting was amazing. But I think the real big takeaway was the engagement. It was cool to see a lot of people come out. Of course, there's a bunch of people who come through because that's their preferred status option, but I think the real impact are those people who are still undecided. And that's one of the things that I thought was really great about the event, was that there were a lot of people who just came to learn more. They're just kind of curious. They want to know more about independence. They want to know what that motto looks like for Guam. And they want to talk to people about it. It's always a fun thing, I think, to have the task forces active and engaged. The Commission on Decolonization is not built to tell you which status to choose. That's kind of counter to an act of self-determination, right? We're not supposed to influence you on which status option you should choose, but more so educate you on your right to choose an option, to freely choose an option. And that can be done through independence. It can also be done through free association, can also be done through full integration, which is also known as statehood. And each option, I think, has their own kind of benefits and advantages. Some of them come obviously with risk. All of them have risk involved. There is no There is no changing without risk. And so, it's an obviously a very big decision to make, which is why, the educational component is really important. People need to really understand, what does it mean if we're committing to full integration? What does it mean if we want to become a state? How does that actually work? And how can it impact us? I think that there are kind of these obvious upsides and obvious downsides. Sometimes the downsides are not so obvious. And some of them, I think it's important to ask yourself, what does it actually look like in attaining that status? If we were to choose independence, or we were to choose free association, or we were to choose statehood, right? All of those have a different path to attaining that actual status, right? For example, if we were to choose full integration, it doesn't matter if every single voter on Guam says, yes, I want to be a state. That's not ultimately up to us, right? That's up to Congress. And so if statehood is our desired option, then I think it's important that we are prepared to actually attain that status. How do we negotiate that with Congress? How do we get them to vote on it and approve it? Excuse me. Sorry. But, same with free association. We're not same, but similar, right? Free association is a mutually agreed contract, basically, right? We're agreeing to be in this exclusive relationship with the United States as a country in a compact of free association, very much like our neighbors in Micronesia, the RMI, FSM, and Palau. And so, every one of those freely associated nations has a different agreement with the United States. Palau's agreement is different than the RMI. RMI's agreement is different than the one they have with the FSM. And each one of them has negotiated their agreement exclusively with the federal government. So, Palau wasn't allowed to be in the room while FSM was negotiating. As a matter of fact, I found out that the U.S. State Department required each nation to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, so that they couldn't discuss the negotiations with their counterparts in Micronesia. I think that was a deliberate strategy in order to kind of isolate each negotiation and handle them separately without allowing them to kind of leverage what the other was doing. I think it's logical, predictable that the one freely associated nation will look at the other and say, hey, well, if you're giving them that, then I want that too. But that's I think that's also something that's something that I think is an advantage for Guam. We've seen what the other nations in Micronesia were able to accomplish, what they were able to win in a negotiation, and what they weren't. We know what the value of Guam is. We know what the value of the other islands in Micronesia are, and the way that the United States has kind of prioritized the use of these islands and what is important to them. We know what is important to us. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to think about, how do we move forward effectively in a negotiation. And independence similarly would be an assertion, right? We'd basically you don't ask for independence, you declare independence. Just like all the other nations who have done it in the past, they didn't ask permission to do it. They just said, this is what we want. We're an independent nation. What they do then is they seek recognition, right? They get other nations to recognize their right to independence. And, I think that no matter what option Guam chooses, whether it be independence, free association, or statehood, I think that it's fairly obvious in my mind that Guam would have an enduring relationship with the United States to some degree. And how close we want that relationship to be, I think, is yet to be seen. And I think that that's also, that will also be determined by the strength of our negotiations, or, you know, the strength of the United States negotiations. How good friends do they want to be with us? We may have things that we want, and they may have things that they're not interested in partnering up with us on. And that's up to them, right? But that, I think, just like you are with your friends, right? Which is a friend that's going to have your back the most? And then, you know, you kind of decide, like, which one I want to be my kid's Nino. You know, it's a similar concept. Like, who am I going to invite? I have a very limited guest list for my daughter's wedding, so depends on what kind of friend you was. If you're going to be on my guest list. Did you make the short list? I'm not quite sure. It depends on if you supported my recycling program or not. Did you contribute to open access for healthcare and help us to stand up the hospital here? Oh, you didn't? Well, I guess you're not making the short list. But, you know, I think that that's something I feel like that should be the exciting part. You know, oftentimes that's the thing that makes people nervous. You know, we kind of freak out like, oh man, what are we going to do without the United States? I don't think that should be the place that we start the discussion. The discussion shouldn't start with where would we be without our colonizer. And that's a very disempowering place to start. I think what we should do instead is start with, you know, what are our needs? What is it that we really need in our community? What do we need to sustain life here and to improve the quality of life here? And then we work from there, right? Once we figure out what we need, then we figure out, you know, what is it that others want from us? And it's not just the United States that wants Guam, right? There are other nations that are interested in a partnership with Guam. But we use that. That's the intelligent thing to do, is to use that in order to win out on the best possible outcome and negotiation for a partnership, you know? And it doesn't have to be, I don't think that it's smart for us, at least, you know, in this kind of day and age. It's not smart for us to just kind of blindly say, oh, well, you know, this country is better than that country. And that should be our only partner, should be the United States. And the United States, don't get me wrong, the United States, I think, provides some really great opportunities for some very beneficial partnerships. But does it all have to be, do we have to exclusively partner with the United States? I think it depends. I think it depends on what we're partnering on. You know, the compacts of free association there's a difference between the freely associated status and the independent status. And one of the major differences, at least in regard to nations that have a compact of free association with the United States, all of those in Micronesia, is really more about exclusivity in regard to defense. That's the thing that all the compacts have in common, is that they have an exclusive arrangement with the United States in regard to military. So the compact nations can engage, they have a right to engage in all kinds of partnerships on almost anything they want, except military. That's the reason why the FSM was able to kind of create these different diplomatic relations and partnerships with China, even though China and the United States are kind of at odds politically. You know, the United States can't stop the FSM from making a deal on economic development with China. They can stop them on making a military deal to utilize their islands, because already the United States kind of has the exclusive on that, right? And so I think that that's something that we need to consider, you know? I would encourage every resident of Guam to be critical of it. Like, don't just say, oh, well, you know, hands down, we will have a defense partnership with the United States. Like, yeah, that may very well be your best partner. It's very possible. But, you know, in an intelligent negotiation, you don't just show your hand, you don't put all your cards on the table. Come on, man, we're playing chess here. It's like playing poker. Keep your poker face on, Guam. Keep your poker face on right. We need to negotiate this thing. You know, I believe that Guam's value is exponential. I really do. I mean, you know, the reason why there's so much attention by the United States on renewing the compacts of free association with the whole of Micronesia, or the remaining nations in Micronesia, is because it presented the opportunity to kind of run the table on Micronesia, right? To be the dominant presence in this part of the ocean. But they did that knowing that Guam was on lock. Like, Guam was a guarantee because they own Guam, right? As an unincorporated territory, it is a possession, it's a property to own, not a nation to negotiate with, which is a very different thing than the way that they do business in the rest of Micronesia with the other nations. And I think that that's the thing that we should be acutely aware of. You know, it shouldn't matter, like, what if you consider yourself a patriotic American, that's cool. That's totally cool. But are you a lesser American? You know what I mean? Like, that should be the bigger question. Like, how are you treated? How is your government treated by the United States government? And what is the difference? What's the difference between the way that the United States government treats Guam versus the way that it treats our neighbors in Micronesia? And just, you know, trim it down to the simple things. The military wants to conduct activity X, Y, or Z in your island. You know, all of those things, all of those kinds of discussions, those are all kind of laid out in very clear terms. This is how it's going to work in Palau. You want to build something in Palau, you want to test something, do something, blow something up, whatever, this is how it's going to work. Here's our procedure. And this is how we're going to get to an agreement between us, which is a very different thing than the way that they do it here in Guam. In Guam, it's just kind of like, well, here's your public notice. Here's your public notice. We informed you of what we're going to do. Oh, you guys don't like it? Well, give us your suggestions, and we'll take them into consideration. And then, you know, at any point, it's not like they have to, they're not legally bound to, you know, to weigh our decision or to weigh our input into their decision. They can ultimately do whatever it is that they want to do with or without our consent. They're not legally required to seek our consent, which is a very different thing than it is with the other nations in Micronesia. And so, you know, I really feel like this is a great opportunity for us to consider, you know, what is a priority for Guam? What is important for us? We've never really got a chance to weigh in on how we think things should happen here. We are always kind of just on the receiving end, and we have no choice but just to accept it. And then to try to figure out, at best, we try to figure out what can we get out of it? You know, how can we sweeten this deal a little bit? Oh, well, you want to dredge all of this coral reef, so, you know, maybe you can throw down some money on growing corals on the other side of the island. Like, oh, you want to, like, disturb all of these ancestral sites and all of these artifacts and ancestral remains. Like, well, maybe you can fund, you know, a museum program or the repository. Hey, sound familiar? $12 million facility. Build a $12 million facility, and we'll just call it even. You know, I think we're better than that, guys. I really do. I believe that we're better than that. I believe that we could be better at negotiating, and that Guam could get a much sweeter deal. But, you know, we can't be making deals when we're not in a position to negotiate. We can't be going into negotiations in an environment where the framework and the rules for engagement are not built fairly. It's not fair, guys. Like, it's not fair for us to go into a negotiation where we're already owned. Like, they already got our number. You know, it's like they say, right? Like, you don't get into a fight where you don't have a chance to win. It's one thing to go and fight the bully that's way bigger than you. But if you got zero chance to win, like, what are you doing? You know, we need to at least, if we're going to be the smaller fighter, we need to at least have, like, the secret knockout punch. And to me, that's the knockout punch, guys, is the yes or no. Do you want to be our friend or not? Because this is what it is. These are our priorities. These are the things that we're not going to negotiate on, that we're going to hold the line on. And if you don't want it, somebody does, and we're ready to make a deal. And it's just smart negotiation. It's just smart to let your potential partner know that there's competition out there, that either you're going to play fair and, we're going to make this mutually beneficial for each of us, or we're going to find somebody that wants to make a mutually beneficial deal instead. And yeah, maybe that makes some people kind of nervous, but I don't think it should. Honestly, I don't think it should make anybody nervous. I really believe that the United States will pay an exorbitant amount of money to maintain a relationship with Guam, no matter what our status is. I really believe that. Guam is that important to them. Now, I would turn around and say that that dollar amount even goes up if we're talking about making this still be a U.S. jurisdiction. Like, not just have a presence, but make it a part of the homeland. I believe that that's worth even more to them. And so, what do you really want? What do the people of Guam really want? I don't think it's impossible for Guam to survive as an independent nation or to thrive as a freely associated nation. And I don't necessarily think that neither do I think it's impossible for Guam to elevate into an equitable status within the U.S. system. But I do think that none of those things are possible if we're not willing to negotiate, if we're not willing to kind of lay it all out on the line and be like, this is the deal, take it or leave it. I don't think that we should be considering what is possible. Like, let me first think about what is likely that we could get, either independence, free association, statehood, and then I'm going to pick the one that's most likely, and then that's the thing that I'm going to vote for. I think what we should do instead is we should ask ourselves, what is the ideal? What is the ideal, and then work our way toward that end. I don't think that it's unrealistic for Guam to just say, like, look, guys, we got like a $10 billion price tag on this thing. Countries have done crazier things and invested ridiculous amounts of money to maintain relations between them. I think we need to be prepared to call the bluff. Call the bluff. Keep your poker face on, Guam. Don't flinch. But there's a lot of I think that the times are changing. The climate is changing. Our community is changing. We're aging and we're growing, and each of us is finding ourselves in different places on a personal level, a professional level, and that's changing the way that we see things. I mean, shoot, man, I feel like I'm a lot more reasonable today than I was when I was 20. When I was 20, I was like, let's just burn it all down. Screw it. Let's burn it all down. Just start all over. Forget this. Where are we protesting today? What about tomorrow? Which fence are we climbing? Let's go. I was not trying to like have a reasonable conversation with anybody. But I'm in a different place right now. I got kids, I got a family. I got to think about, how I'm going to put food on the table. I don't have the luxury anymore of just kind of being taken care of, and now I can just make, all my basic needs are met. So I'm going to put all of this political work in the main my main living space. I don't have the time I had when I was younger to just go out and volunteer and organize and, plan meetings and protests and stuff. So, and I think that a lot of us are experiencing this. A lot of us are finding ourselves in this place where, we want to do something about it, but we're trying to do something about our immediate problems today, right now, yesterday. And, it's a very it's a very complex thing to do. But I also think that the climate is changing, the perspective is changing. I think that a lot of people are becoming more objective when they talk about this issue. And I think it should be, it really needs to be the priority. By the way, I've been trying to find this guy. If you're out there listening, I've been reading these opinion letters. Every now and then there's an opinion letter that comes out in the PDN, and it's by this guy who goes by A. Vincent Leon Guerrero. And if you know who A. Vincent Leon Guerrero is, that is writing these letters to the PDN, please let me know. Call me. The number is 922-1051 or 1052. But I need to know. I need to find this guy. I want to get this guy on the show, and I want to have a discussion. But he's been having, he's put out some really great letters. And some of them are just very well written. And he talks about, a lot of it is advocating for political status resolution, that, we need to be serious, and we need to make this a priority. His most recent letter, where is it? I'm going to pull this up. His most recent letter was on the 4th. Oh, July 4th. Yeah, there it is. July 4th. His letter was entitled, "Why Do Our People Leave?" And he's basically talking about, he's talking about the brain drain, right? This hard truth that Guam has been stuck in limbo for generations. We are a part of America, but not fully. We are citizens, but not fully. And that in-between status has shaped our island more than we like to admit. So, he's basically advocating for political status as a way to battle against the brain drain, right? That if we imagine what it's like if Guam invests in its people beyond tourism, imagine, us shifting our priorities to create, more jobs here, good jobs, steady jobs in healthcare, technology, green energy, small business, creative arts. What does it do for our community? Which I think is a really important discussion for small island communities like ours. One of the great examples is Singapore. Singapore is a very small nation. It's a relatively isolated nation that doesn't have a whole lot of natural resources. Doesn't have gold or oil or nickel or whatever. No natural exploitable export, no resource that they can just say, okay, we're going to mine all of this stuff and then we're going to sell it and use it to make money. And so Singapore has, their main economic driver is international banking. But one of the real interesting things about Singapore is that they have one of the top education systems in the world. And it's a very, very intense and strict system, but these guys are farming out professionals and keeping them there, which is an awesome thing, And we always kind of get into this, I think, every year, especially around this time, right, when schools are closed and everybody's wondering, which school is not going to open come August. It's always kind of like we're rolling the dice, right? Like whose kids are going to be on an extended school year because they started late. And we always have to ask the question, right? What will be the deficiencies in our system this year? DOE just announced that there are 200 teacher vacancies in DOE this year, which is a crazy thing if you think about it. And so what does Guam's system look like if we are investing in education and investing in retaining our professionals and our talented individuals? Anyhow, I'm totally going off on this one, and we've got about 10 minutes to the top of the hour, but we have a caller, and I want to get to our caller before we take a break. Hafaday caller, you are on the air, 105.1 FM. You're live on the air with us. Hello?
Hello.
Hafaday, you're on the air with us. How can I help you? Or you have a question,
Again,
comment?
Decolonization ever since. Can you imagine just being free? FREEDOOM, freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of
Melvin,
that's the point, right?
Not free, but here we are in our own homeland. FREEDOOM. When are they going to give us that right to self-determination? Everyone was given that right, Melvin. Why not us?
I mean, that's a good point. I think that the big kind of factor here is the benefit to the federal government keeping us as an unincorporated territory. I think there's clear advantages to having a possession rather than having to deal with a freely governing people. You know, the way the United States federal government deals with the FSM is very different, very complex compared to us.
They're pretty smart. I like the way they do their politics. Over here, we got no say-so. We're not invited to the table. We're second-class U.S. citizens. What else is it, Kadua? Why can't we just be friends, man? No one's telling them to go away. Can you just give us that right so we can exercise that like everybody else did? Right. I don't think so, because we're strategic. We're protecting the continental United States out here on this side of our state against our enemies out on this side of the sticks. Russia, China, Kim Jong-un. That's what we are. We're a floating base out here in the Pacific. And what's in it for us, man? They said that they're coming to Guam. They're coming to Guam. What happened? Oh, the prices went up from rent, power, food, you name it, land. Everything went up. So, and they said we're going to the moon. I don't think so. And one Hawaiian lady did come here, and she told you. She said, "Hey, man, you've been denied three times." Remember, different to Ben Pangilinan first brought this up. Right. Well, he didn't first bring it up, but to exercise your right and put your name down so we can vote for that, right? Right. She said, Guam, we've been doing this for a long time. The only mistake they did was they didn't take it to the International World Court of Law, like you should do, because you've been denied 3 times, man. So you got every right to go to the International Court of Law, and when you do that, they can't deny you that right anymore. And then she said, Hawaii said, we'll be right behind you, and all the other colonized nations will be right behind you. Then they're going to have to listen to us. No one's chasing them away or telling them to leave, because we need them, just like they need us. Right. So can we be friends in 60-40, and you guys can have the 60 and give us the 40? Because right now we're at 0%. And you know that window of opportunity, it's probably already closed, man, and they're going to hold us for another 10 decades. You can keep on, but they will not. And once they lock us in place, which they probably already did, we can keep on talking and yapping and yelling and all that kind of stuff, but we're going to be an unincorporated trust territory of the United States, a possession. I own you. And who's that said? Obama said slave days are over. It's alive and well in Guam. Dictatorship days are over. That's alive and well here in Guam. It's just a different word. So when are they going to, or when are we going to wake up and tell them, hey, man, can we be friends?
It's a good question. It's a fair question.
We fought for every single war. We didn't have to prove nothing to nobody no more. We fought for that flag. And this is what they do to us. Anyway, Melvin, you just keep on, man, and maybe you figure out, because they wrote the law, and they can break the law, and they're going to wiggle you around their law, and enough is enough, man. It's been too long ever since, man, and all we're asking for is a little say-so. There's something wrong with that, and they can still have all their bases. Maybe we can earn $1 billion a year for Nickelback and $1 billion for Anderson and First Base, and take that money and throw it into our economy so we can stop saying that they're giving us money? Nobody writes for free because they said feed themselves for free.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a free
You're
lunch.
smart guy,
I agree with that.
You're a good, smart guy. Your mom raised you good. Anyway, I'll let you go ahead and talk.
Jesus Masi Senor, thank you for calling and sharing your perspective. I appreciate it. The number is 922-1051 or 1052 if you want to join the conversation. I think that there's a very, very valid and fair point. The United States has diplomatic relations, agreements with other nations all over the world. There are a lot of examples of this. There's kind of the standard contract, so to speak, right? It's called a status of forces agreement. This is what the Philippines used when the United States Marine Corps wanted to set up shop in Subic Bay. And it's basically a contract, right? You had this independent nation in the Philippines, an independent nation of the United States. One wanted to have a presence in the other, and so they made a deal. And they came up with, the terms of that arrangement. And when the arrangement was not favorable, then it ended. Which is a totally different thing than what we're seeing here, right? We're in the midst of a massive military relocation here in Guam. The impact on Guam is undeniable. We're set to receive somewhere like around 40,000 people by 2030 or something like that. And that's not all soldiers. I think the count of soldiers is somewhere around 8,000. But all the dependents, associated contractors, workers, other personnel, the total number is around 40 grand. And it's crazy to think about, you don't have to be a mathematician to crunch these numbers and kind of, predict that there's going to be an impact on Guam. I mean, if you work in the Central and you live in the North, I'm sure you've noticed that traffic has changed significantly in the last 5 years. I mean, just 5 years. It's absolutely noticeable. You cannot deny it. Everywhere on Guam, traffic has changed in the last 5 years. And that's just, sheer numbers. There's more people on Guam. There's more cars on the road. And how do we negotiate kind of these smaller issues that have larger impact? Like housing is a huge one, right? It's no secret that the military relocation is having an impact on available housing on Guam and the cost of housing on Guam. Military housing allowance is much higher than what most, your average family on Guam can afford to pay in rent. And so now there's a higher demand, or there's a greater kind of availability for people receiving a military housing allowance. And now housing is just out of reach for a lot of different families that don't meet that threshold. What about vehicles? I just saw one of these Instagram posts. Tell me your car has been to Guam without telling me you've been to Guam. And they show like some lady who's, like her husband's got to be a soldier or something. And they had their minivan. Their minivan has tint on it. It has a dashboard cover. And they're doing all of these things, right, to show like how hot it gets on Guam and how your car, the minivan got Jaff on the paint now. And like, it just made me think about how abundantly easy it is to get your car shipped to Guam. Like if you're serving in the military and you want to take your car with you. Think if you're out on the road right now, just look around. I guarantee you between now and the time that you get to your destination, you're going to see a couple off-island plates, like stateside plates. I just saw for the first time, I was totally geeking out. I just saw a U.S. Virgin Islands license plate. I was like, whoa, never seen that one before. It's a new one. But, I mean, that's what it is, right? It's very easy to ship a vehicle to Guam. And this is the part of the negotiation one of the many parts that's missing, right? We didn't negotiate this. We didn't ask for the buildup. The buildup was decided between the United States government and the Japanese government. Japanese government ain't even paying to help some of this happen, right? But Guam only gets involved when we're able to say, hey, well, these are the things that we would like you to mitigate. But at no point do we say, no, we don't want that. No, you can't do that. No deal. Which I think is important. I think that's something that everybody should be willing to do. Anyhow, we are at the top of the hour, and I got a lot more to say about this, so we're going to just take our break right about now. But we will be back for the next hour, so keep it locked with us. You're listening to Challenge the Status Quo on Wave 105.1 FM, and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
KGUM FM, Dedido. The talk of Guam is Wave 105 FM.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Matt Piper. The death toll in Texas Hill Country has just risen to 79. It's after a flash flood slammed the area Friday. Governor Greg Abbott is promising a relentless search.
We continue 24/7 operations to search for anybody who was affected by that deadly storm.
And water rescues are still taking place.
First responders along the Guadalupe River continue in search and rescue mode, hoping to find any signs of life. Kerr County Sheriff Larry Letha.
At present, there's over 400 first responders for more than 20 agencies that are working in Kerr County. We have more than a dozen canine working in and near the river.
More than 100 air, water, and ground vehicles as well. So far, more than 850 rescues. Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a declaration making today a day of prayer. And Pope Leo XIV with a message of condolences and prayers as well. Chris Fox for CBS News, Austin.
CBS's Karen Hua says there are many questions on if alerts were sent out on people's cell phones in time.
Was there any sort of emergency alert, phone message, siren, warning people about this flash flooding on Friday? We know at this point the Texas Department of Emergency Management put resources in place Thursday when they heard forecasts of at least 8 inches of rain. Officials say they didn't realize the rain would be much heavier than 8 inches. But we want to know if any warning was still given to residents or folks in this area.
Tropical storm Chantel has been downgraded to a depression after making landfall in South Carolina. National Weather Service meteorologist Greg Galena with what's next.
It's going to be slowly moving northward through central North Carolina. It'll be a potential flash flooding threat, given the fact that it will also have similar capability of producing 2 to 3 inch per hour rain rates and some localized totals in excess of 6 inches.
You may just be stuck in traffic right now. That is what it sounds like at Los Angeles International Airport at baggage claim. Millions are heading home by car, plane, and train after the July 4th holiday. Hopefully the patience was also packed, as 72 million were expected to travel over the weekend. With President Trump's 90-day freeze on sweeping U.S. tariffs set to expire Wednesday, the White House has touted new trade agreements with countries in recent weeks. And White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett tells Face the Nation more deals will come by midweek.
The headline is going to be that countries are agreeing around the world to open their markets up to our products and to allow us to put some kind of tariff on their products when they come into the U.S.
Authorities say they found the bodies of all 7 people who had been missing since an explosion at a fireworks warehouse in Northern California. This is CBS News.
Think O'Reilly Auto Parts for all your car care needs. Get the parts and service you need fast from the professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Hey, it's Mike Rohn. If I have a choice, I like to do business with companies that actually stand for something. That's why I switched from Verizon to Pure Talk. No offense to Verizon, I'm sure they stand for something. I just don't know what it is. Pure Talk, on the other hand, is a veteran-owned company that supports our military in a big way, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I also appreciate unlimited talk and text and plenty of data for half the cost of the big guys. And I do like being on America's most dependable 5G network for just $20 a month. But what I really appreciate is no contract, no cancellation fees, and Pure Talk's commitment to handle all their customer service in this country. I saw it for myself. I went to Georgia, I got a tour of their headquarters, I met their CEO, and I talked to the same customer service folks that you'll talk to when you dial pound 250 and say keyword micro. Switch today and save 50% off your first month when you dial pound 250 and say keyword micro. Pure Talk, a wireless company that actually stands for something.
East Coast fast food chain is making a comeback.
Roy Rogers just opened up a new location in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, part of an expansion plan across multiple states. The Maryland-based chain was founded in 1968, but the nearly 650 locations were sold to Hardee's back in 1990. The sons of a former Marriott exec who owned some Roy Rogers franchises bought back the brand in 2002 and slowly started opening shop again, complete with the iconic Fixin's Bar. Right now, there are 24 company-owned restaurants and 16 franchises in 7 states. Stacey Lynn, CBS News.
Jurassic World Rebirth has topped the holiday weekend box office.
We need DNA from the 3 biggest dinosaurs.
It earned $91.5 million over the traditional 3-day weekend. Second place going to the Brad Pitt racing film F1 with $26 million. Matt Piper, CBS News.
You've amassed a lot of credit card debt and have an opportunity to roll it onto a credit card with a much lower rate. Is that a good idea? I'm Greg McBride with the Bankrate.com Personal Finance Minute. A balance transfer card might welcome your existing card debt at a low or even 0% interest rate, at least to start. These cards are typically offered to consumers who have good to excellent credit. If you have several cards with small outstanding balances, you might consolidate all of them onto that one new card and be left with just one monthly payment. But here are some things you need to know. Balance transfers often involve fees, and the card's interest rate may go considerably higher once the introductory period is over. Under federal law, the low teaser rate must last at least 6 months, and many balance transfer cards do keep the low rate in place for 9 to 18 months and sometimes even longer. After the transfer is complete, make sure your old cards have been paid off by checking those statements when they come. For more on this, visit Bankrate.com. I'm Greg McBride.
I'm Larry Magid with the Connect Safely report. I have family members who swear that their phones are listening to them. They have a conversation, perhaps in their living room, and minutes later they see an ad related to that conversation. It may seem like anecdotal evidence, but what's really happening is predictive profiling. Apps and ad networks are tracking what you search, browse, and even what your friends are searching. And with enough data, they can guess what you're interested in before you say it out loud. That said, there are apps that actually could be listening because they have permission to access your microphone. So unless you have complete trust in an app, you might consider going into settings on iOS or Android and turning off the permission for that app to access your microphone. You'll find more at connectsafely.org/radio. With the Connect Safely report, I'm Larry Magid for CBS News.
The views and opinions expressed in this show are that of the show host, guests, and callers. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the staff and management of Wave 105 FM, Glimpses Media, or any of our partners. As we strive to provide quality, respectful, and engaging content, we welcome you to participate in the conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Wave 105 FM, the sound of Guam. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back to the show. You're tuned in to Wave 105.1 FM. This is Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin. Wonpat, Borja. I represent the Commission on Decolonization, and we're here for another hour having some political status discussions. I mentioned in the last hour that I've been on the hunt, and if you're out there listening and you can help me out, I'm looking for a guy named letter A, initial A, Vincent Leon Guerrero. Vincent Leon Guerrero. He wrote some opinion letters to the PDN, the last of which was on July 6th. He just put one out on July 6th entitled The Hope We've Been Missing. And I really like this guy's style, man. So if you know this guy, please call me at the station, 922-1051, or you can email me at melvin.borja@guam.gov. I really would like to get in touch with this gentleman, and I would love to have him in the studio so we can have a discussion. I think he's got some really great ideas. He says some really cool stuff in these letters that I really appreciate and really resonated with me. And I think they resonate with a lot of other people. He says in this most recent PDN letter from the 6th, July 6th, He talks about how there's always some latest scandal or outrage that dominates the headlines. And he says, meanwhile, the issue that should matter most quietly waits its turn. Our island's political status, the question of who we are, how we are seen by the world, remains unresolved. It hangs in the background like unfinished business from another generation. And far too often, it feels like a niche topic. Sometimes something only politicians or activists debate, an academic question, a side conversation for town halls or special conferences. It shouldn't be. Our status isn't a side issue. It's the issue, the defining issue of our time. It shapes everything, our economy, our rights, our sense of security, our future. But instead of confronting it, we get caught up in the noise of the moment. I wish that wasn't the case, but I understand why it is. Man, I like your steez, A. Vincent Leon Guerrero. If you know who this gentleman is, you recognize this writing, please get in touch with me. I would love to have a discussion with A. Vincent Leon Guerrero. I think there's a lot of great things that points that he raises around this topic that I think are really relevant. He says in the same letter, he says that we talk about jobs, but we don't talk about who controls the rules that impact our economy. We talk about safety, but not about who gets to make the decisions that affect our borders, our environment, our resources. We talk about opportunities for our kids, but we rarely ask why the island still faces barriers that other places don't. Those conversations are all connected. Status isn't abstract, it's the foundation. Older generations have carried so much for so long, but the burden of building a better future, that belongs to the young. And I don't say that lightly. I say it because history proves it. Every real change, every real fight for justice, independence, equality was pushed forward by people who weren't weighed down by decades of disappointment. It's the young who still believe the world can shift. It's the young who aren't tired of trying. That's who I'm counting on. I love this. I love this. This is why, man. This is why we're out here in the schools and trying to, engage with young people, especially teenagers and people in their 20s, because these are the folks that are really interested in this discussion. And it's not to say that, that other people are not interested. Older people are not as concerned. But older people have had their opportunity to be involved in this. And it's not to say that they cannot be or that they shouldn't be. I think they absolutely should be. But I also think it's responsible for us to deliberately bring in the next generation of Chamorros and of Guamanians. We have to. If you think about it, let's just say, for example, we're to have a plebiscite today. Let's say we were to vote on our political status today. It would only allow people between 18 and above to vote. It took the Philippines about a decade to move fully into their independent status. So let's just say that you're 40 today and we voted. In 10 years, you'll be 50 when we're just kind of getting started. It'll be another 10 years before we really see what our political status can do. By then, you're collecting Social Security. You know what I mean? And a lot of people who are not eligible to vote, like people who are 15 today, in 20 years, they're 35. Like they're in the midst of it. This is impacting them directly now. And so I definitely think it's really important, to have young people involved in this discussion, to have them participate and to, really weigh in on what it is that they want. I want to acknowledge we have some viewers on the Instagram feed. Jordine is out there. Hey, Jordine. Jordine says, I'm not sure if this is a typo. It says, Lujan speaks the truth. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, their status and founding document Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, continues to reshape the social, political, and environmental realities. I agree, and there's been a lot of issues with the Treaty of Waitangi, especially in among Native people who don't feel like it's being honored. And again, this is another example of the kind of fundamental inferiority of the Guam's unincorporated territory status, right? It's a different thing when we're talking about a treaty. A treaty is supposed to be like the highest law of the land, of the world, right? The globe, international treaty. And that's the difference between us and First Nations peoples. Native American tribes in the United States are working through a government to government, nation to nation agreement. It's a treaty between the First Nations peoples and the United States government. That's how they're able to create these agreements on reservations, and reservations, Indian reservations have kind of their own system, their own governing and law system. They even have their own police force. And of course it's not always sufficient. There has to be, further partnership between the two nations, but it's a very different thing dealing, when the federal government deals with a Native American nation versus a possession like Guam. Jordine also says we should never stop until we achieve our self-determination. Amen to that, Jordine. I agree. And thanks for tuning in. We got a caller on the line. Kai Tau Tau. I don't know if I'm saying that right or if I'm separating it or combining it, but Kai Tau Tau wants to chime in. Hafaday, Kai, you're on the air with us.
Yeah, Melvin, remember way back Time Magazine?
Sorry, say again?
Time Magazine.
Yes,
one of the
Time Magazine.
biggest, baddest magazine back in its time.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Front page. Maybe you can look it up and do research. They're all standing on their battleship using those infrared lens. And the top boss would say, see if you can hit that coconut tree over there, son. That's when they were testing their missiles.
Right.
Kwajalein Islands.
Right.
Marshall Islands.
Mm-hmm. I remember.
And there were people there living at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
But I guess they didn't care. Those people right now are called nuclear nomads. You know what a nomad is, Melvin?
Yeah, right. So, and which is
can't go home.
Right.
There's no home.
Right, their assholes completely destroyed.
Yes, and they won their case 50 years later, I believe, over in Hawaii, and they're getting compensated and medical treatment and all that because they know they've been contaminated.
Yeah, it was undeniable, the contamination impact on their environment and their health.
And the people that were living there at the time.
Right.
And did they care? They were setting it up for the atomic bomb that they dropped on Nagasaki, Hiroshima.
Right.
All I'm saying is, man, Robert Cholesterol, nuclear downwinders. Finally, after how long has Robert been fighting that? 30 years?
Yeah, something like
on
that.
the floor, and I don't even know if, but yeah, the fallout, it came here, and our people ate, they ate the shuni, the dogu, the fuga, the manga, the manha, the nidjuk, and they got contaminated ourselves over here. But did they get paid for? I know the people that were here at the time, they were stationed there, got paid.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Celestial mentioned that when he was on the show with us a couple weeks ago, that he himself is, he's recognized as, I can't remember the exact name for it, but it's basically somebody who recognized as a nuclear veteran. And so there's recognition for the service members, right?
He was cleaning up the area, the place, and that's why he's got all kinds of sickness.
But that was one of the things that he mentioned was that it's just really disheartening that he has this recognition because of his time in the service and working in those contaminated sites, but that the people who lived in these areas that also experienced the same kind of exposure aren't recognized.
Yeah, like I said, look at that front page, and they're all wearing infrared lens, and see if you can hit that coconut tree over there, son. They were testing their missiles over there, and I guess they didn't care that there were people living there.
Right.
Or maybe they did, but that's what I'm talking about, man. We fought for that flag ever since. We've died and spilled our blood, sweat, and tears from America, and they're still playing that hostage game. This is what they do to us out on this side of the sticks, and we're the first ones they're going to shoot if anything was to go down. And they say, well, we got the third missile and all that. Well, they said that about Hawaii when they did Oahu. And I'm just saying, man, enough is enough. Freedom is not peace. So let's start making them pay for some of the land that they took out here. They took a lot of the land, and they're locking it into place as we speak. With all the tension going on, they've got some real good reasons to lock it up. But still, that doesn't mean that we don't, hey, just give us what we're asking for, and you can still lock it up, man. Most time you guys leave, it'd be nice to know that we got you guys out there anywhere, anytime, any place in your backyard. That'd be nice, but we keep on, and the older generation fought just as hard as you guys are fighting now. Different always of this. Victoria Leon Guerrero, you put her in the floor, and they're not going to know which way to look, man. If you're listening, Victoria, you're just like the Kuntuangit, and you know how to talk. You know how to beat them by
That's high praise. I'm going to tell her that.
The games today, Melvin, we're being choked out here, man. We're becoming outsiders in our own homeland. And Reagan said, Gorbachev, take the wall down. We are being fenced in. You see what I'm trying to say?
Right.
So I'm just saying, man, hey, America, we died for your flag, man. I got a lot of friends, family, cousins that got blown up. What else do we have to do to prove that we are true blood America, whatever, and we're out here in this side of the sticks, man, and we got to live in, all we want to do is live and die in peace in our own homeland. How are we going to do that, Lana? The COVID didn't kill us, that $200,000, $500,000 homes will. Everything keeps going up, so what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? There's some people that are sitting pretty, but not everybody's sitting pretty on this island, man. There's people out there in the sticks, and keep on what you're doing, man, and the people then pag-inan, misa rin po do hunggan, manacture, malat, tapan dana, tapan news, tapan net good, Guam, with the tinan, pagan, and magan, tobu, gusta. Mga machete, they were even on the bomb target for $20,000 a bomb. Can you believe that? They don't need no target practice, Melvin. If they know where you're at on the other side of the road, they'll just put a beam on you and you're done. Hey, anyway, Melvin, hey, dispensa to us, because we've been doing this for the longest time, man, and we think we can get this thing done so we can all sit down and relax and party, nice. Or whatever, and everyone, I mean, we can all live in peace, man, and because if they do it, I'm telling you, back then my mom and her mom could run. We ain't running nowhere, Melvin. No underground shelter, no nothing. They said when the siren goes off, where we going to go? I hear it all the time up here, Melvin. This is just that. This is the real thing. Underground shelter. Why, anywhere we can go. Homeland Security said, go to the store and buy duct tape, and everybody went and bought a bunch of duct tape and duct tape the window. Come on, man. Just the brass alone will hurt you. I'm telling you, man, the kind of weapons you got now, you ain't running nowhere. So what will it for us? You think they can relocate the Manongko and the children and to Kentucky? Give me some whole set? In case we become another history repeats itself. People in the family area. Nobody in, nobody out. And hey, they can say never. Let me tell you, this place, hey, when it starts, where we're going to go, Melvin? We're going to all jump in the car. How are we all going to be packed down? Open up the sewer and the road and go under if you can fit in it. But, hey, man, sorry about the way I talk, but it's been a long, long time. And we tried this part of everything else. We're still trying, and just to know that, and the biggest enemy is, thank you, Melvin.
Thank you, Senor. Thanks for sharing your perspective. Thanks to everyone out there who's been listening in. If you want to get involved in the conversation, the number is 922-1051 or 1052. You can even text your comment to the 1051 number. It's on WhatsApp. Thanks to everyone who's on our Instagram Live, the Guam COD Instagram Live. If you tune in that way, I apologize. We've been having some internet instability, so I had to restart the live feed. But we're back on, and if you prefer that medium, please follow us on Instagram at Guam COD. I think that these are all very relevant comments. The one is very timely. Our last caller mentioned that there's generations of Chamorros and people from Guam who have served in the military, who have fought in a violent conflict. We're celebrating the commemoration, the history of Operation New Life here on Guam, for those of you that remember that. Operation New Life was the refugee effort to resettle refugees from Vietnam as a result of the Vietnam War. It's often kind of referenced that Chamorros and people from Guam served at a higher rate per capita in the Vietnam War than anywhere else in the United States, which is also true for a lot of other wars. Vietnam War, the Korean War, a lot of Chamorros who are veterans of the Korean War and the Vietnam War. But those two in particular, the Korean War and Vietnam War, were kind of the proving ground for a lot of Chamorros. This is when we had, it wasn't too long before that we become U.S. citizens and became eligible to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces. And so, for a lot of Chamorros, that was their way of kind of proving that they deserved the basic protections and rights provided by the United States Constitution. Unfortunately, that's not what we got. And there are a lot of Chamorros who signed their name on the dotted line with the understanding of that promise. That we would be treated as equals, that we would have our rights protected. But, just recently we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Organic Act of Guam. And, though there are a lot of great things to celebrate around the adoption of the Organic Act of Guam, and it's definitely not as simple as just the granting of U.S. citizenship. One of the things that I think is really important about the Organic Act of Guam was that it laid the foundation for the beginnings of our local system of government. That's when we were able to start having open elections for political leadership. That's when we started to see the inception of the Guam Congress, and in 1970 we started to vote for our own governor. Not long after that, we were able to get a delegate in Congress. So there's been a lot of improvements. There's been a lot of advancements, a lot of development and growth that we've seen in at a local level. And yes, absolutely. For all the critics out there who are just like, oh, government in Guam is so corrupt and so inefficient, and how could we ever govern ourselves? I think that's something that. Again, that's something that shouldn't stop us. We can't let all of the challenges that we face dissuade us from pursuing this universal human right. What government is without issue, without challenges? There's not a government on the face of this planet that has just had a perfect run at it. Every government has its issues. Every government has its challenges. Every government faces some level of corruption that needs to be corrected. You going to sit here and tell me the U.S. government is without corruption, without scandal, without challenges, without failures? I think that it's those are things that just kind of come with the territory. You're always going to be faced with those challenges. But if we're going to say that, we'd rather just let somebody else do it for us, then we'll always just kind of be passengers on the vehicle that's charting our own destiny. You know, we will always kind of be along for the ride, which is not where you want to be. I think that we should all be willing to steer the boat ourselves. Sail the sack, man, guys. We got to do it. It's got to happen. In some other exciting news, the Micronesian Islands Forum took place. It started on July 30th and ended just this July 4th over the weekend, last weekend. And it was held in the Marshall Islands this year. From this conference, Guam was represented. Thankfully, Guam has made a commitment to continue its engagement at the Micronesian Islands Forum. Micronesian Islands Forum is composed of the other Micronesian island nations, including Guam, the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau, along with Guam. Guam this year was the last term of the governor as chairwoman. So Governor of Guam was serving as chairwoman for the last year and passed on to new leadership this year. Oh, I forgot Kiribati in the group. Kiribati is also one of the nations that participates in MIF. So the governor went to represent Guam in MIF. The focus for the Micronesian Summit in Majuro was one step ahead aims to be one step ahead by the Asia Pacific report. So the nations, of course, include RMI, Guam, CNMI, FSM, Nauru, and Kiribati. Additionally, the Secretary of the Pacific Islands Forum, Secretary General Baron Wanga, was in attendance, and this particular there are a number of things that were discussed at the Pacific Islands Forum, Micronesian Islands Forum this year. But one of the big things, at least in regard to this discussion, was the resolution, an attempt to pass a resolution in support of Guam's self-determination. The focus of the Micronesian Islands Forum, of course, is to strengthen regional solidarity and build common ground for these island nations. So, being a small nation in the Pacific, it's easy to kind of get lost in the mix among representation from other larger nations. But what we've seen in the past is an effort to unify the nations of Oceania. That's what the Pacific Islands Forum was built to do. But the Micronesian Islands Forum was a concerted effort to assert place for these nations in our region in Micronesia. Micronesia is often very underrepresented in international fora. But, these nations, particularly FSM, RMI, Palau, have all kind of created this political bloc at an international level by standing together. And so it's awesome that Guam is able to participate in the Micronesian Islands Forum, also in the Pacific Islands Forum. Guam has just elevated to associate member level or associate member status at the Pacific Islands Forum. And so, it's important that Guam is represented and can partake in these discussions. There are a lot of issues that affect all oceanic nations, all Pacific Island nations. And most of these Pacific Island nations have become fully self-governing. There are kind of some obvious others that are not, like French Polynesia, which is still a colony of France. New Caledonia, also a colony of France. So there are a number of Pacific Islands that are still under a colonial status. But the relationship with their sovereign partners has really, elevated their ability to impact policy. So at this past MIF, I actually just heard from the governor over the weekend that the members of MIF voted to approve Guam, the resolution on support for Guam's self-determination and political status resolution, Guam's decolonization, which I think was fun because, ironically, coincidentally, they approved the resolution on July 4th. Which is fun. It's fun, right? I think it's fun. Which is, is really exciting, especially because there's already community work going on to align with the 4th of July. And we mentioned this earlier. The Independence Task Force held their annual Nat Lot Sounds of Freedom concert on July 4th at the Lime this past weekend. It was a really cool thing. I'm really glad that we were able to participate and attend. I brought my family. My daughter wanted to see some of the art and some of the performances. And so I went down with my son, my daughter, my wife, and it was a really good time. I was really excited to see a nice kind of cross-representation of age demographic. So there's a lot of young people down there, a lot of kids, but there's also a lot of Saina, a lot of Mañana were down there. And it was cool to see like this intergenerational exchange, which is a lot of fun. I always enjoy, seeing our young folks connecting with our elders and, the sharing of stories. A lot of these elders who come to these events are, they've been around the block a few times. They've had seen their fair share of struggle, and they've been involved in their fair share of organizing. So, it's really inspiring to get the young people connected with the older generations. I think it's critical that our elders help to inform the work that we do. And it's it's definitely encouraging to see people curious about any of the statuses. I hope to see this kind of turn out for the next Free Association event, the next statehood event, and the next Commission on Decolonization event. If you're doing an event and you want us to come down and do some outreach, please let us know. You can email us at guamcod@guam.gov, and we'd be happy to reach out and figure out how we can share our information. All of our information is digital. If you're interested, you can visit www.decol.guam.gov. That's decol.guam.gov. All of our educational information is in PDF format. It's all searchable. The full-length study is available on PDF version. And then we also have physical resources if you'd like to get your hands on them. Feel free to reach out to our office. Follow us on social media. We're at Guam COD on Instagram, and we are on Facebook at the Commission on Decolonization. We also have a YouTube page if you are into the video resources. But there's a wealth of information out there, and we're really excited to share this information with the community and help them to understand better what the right to self-determination looks like, what are the legitimate options out there, and how can you benefit from them. I'm still on the hunt for Mr. Leon Guerrero. If you're out there listening, Vincent Leon Guerrero, I'm trying to find you, man. Get in touch with me. A lot of what we talk about on this show is really is represented in the letters that Mr. Leon Guerrero has been submitting. So if you're out there or you know who this individual is, please let me know. I'm super interested in trying to find this gentleman and have this discussion. But I did want to share, there was another letter. Shoot, I'm trying to pull this thing up. There was another letter that was penned by this gentleman, Mr. Vincent Leon Guerrero. This was on the 3rd. He was on a tear in July, I just got to say. He said, he opens the letter by saying, the letter is entitled Status Quo is a Cage, which I couldn't agree with more. And he says, to open the letter, every time I see a poll asking Guam residents to choose between statehood, independence, free association, and then status quo, I wonder how we've come to accept being stuck as a valid option. The status quo is a trap. We are U.S. citizens who can't vote for president. We have no voting power in Congress. We live under decisions made by others with no real say of our own. To list the status quo as a viable option in polls is to normalize injustice. It gives the illusion of choice while keeping us in political limbo. Many defend the status quo out of fear of losing federal aid, fear of instability, fear of change. But that fear reveals the deeper problem. We've become so dependent, we're afraid to imagine life any other way. Man, I like this guy. Who are you, A. Vincent Leon Guerrero? Your mama raised you right, man. I like your steez. You know, I love this idea because we deal with this a lot. You know, I deal with this in my everyday. Even here on the show, people call, they're like, well, what about status quo? And I'm over here like, what about it? The show's called Challenge the Status Quo. Why do you think we called it that? You know, it's ironic because in the past, there have actually been referenda. There have been official referendum where people were asked to choose their preference, and status quo has been on the ballot. There was even one point when there was an option called status quo, and then there was another one called status quo with improvements. And that's it. Status quo with improvements. It wasn't like see the fine print for the improvements. Nobody said what the improvements were. They're just improvements. Like status quo plus you get a large fries. Nobody knew what it was. And it was the top voting option. Like that was the thing that people chose the most, was status quo with improvements, even without knowing what the improvements were. I think everybody just kind of assumed improvements must mean more money. And what if it was? What if that's what it really was? Status quo with more money. But how much more money? Nobody even knew how much more money, and they're just like, yeah, that one. Status quo plus $7.50 more every year. And it's grandfathered. It has a sunset. It'll expire in 30 years. Right alongside the Compact of Free Association. I don't know, it's 20. It's ridiculous, guys. It's ridiculous. I got to share a personal story. When I first got this job, this was back in 2019. I first got this job, and I was super green, guys. I'm not going to lie. I was very much like just trying to figure it out. Just trying to figure out how to be a director of the Commission on Decolonization. What exactly am I supposed to do? I knew what I wanted to do, but, you know, how do I do that with my one brochure that they left behind? Anyhow, I got notice from the Office of the Governor that this guy, Doug Dominich, was coming to Guam. Doug Dominich at the time was the Assistant Secretary of the Interior. The Assistant Secretary of the Interior, the Department of Interior. For those of you who don't know, the Department of Interior is like the federal department that handles like the endangered species. But, you know, ironically also the territories, because that's where we are. They lump us together with the animals. So Doug Dominich comes, the Assistant Secretary of the Interior, and he's here really to do like assessment on grants, right? Grant programs that are available to the insular areas. And so the Office of the Governor calls me and says, hey, you gotta host the Assistant Secretary because he's here, and you're under DOI, you deal with DOI. So I was like, okay, cool. So we hosted the Assistant Secretary of the Interior, and I was just shocked because he straight up told me that, well, the federal government supports self-determination for Guam, but only if status quo is going to be on the ballot. I was like, I'm going to need that in writing from President Trump. President Trump was the president at that time. I was like, we're not doing that, homie. No way. And it was just like, it just set me off, man. It was a bad place to start the meeting. It just left me all sour afterward. Anyhow, I'll tell more of this story in a bit, but we have a caller real quick. So I want to get to this. Hafaday, Charlie Hermosa, you are on the air with us. How can I help you?
Hey,
Hafaday,
Melvin,
sir.
how are you? Hafaday.
Good. I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, I've been doing a little bit of research, kind of reading up, because, you get so many different angles, right, from everybody. And obviously you got to listen up to everybody's, different way of thinking. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you was your thoughts on was something that I read and also listened to one of the UN sessions where, the potential of a fourth option, right? The fourth option being, is there a way that we could actually create something new? Could we request something other than the three options that have been presented? Just wanted to see what your take was on that, or even is that even a possibility of us requesting something other than the three options that we have now?
Yes, actually there is. So there is a United Nations resolution. It's a kind of a lesser reference resolution, but I have the uncomfortable coincidence of having this one referenced on me quite a bit. I can't remember what it is. It's like resolution. The two main ones are 1514 and 1541. And 1514 and 1541 are the ones that recognize these particular options. But there's another one. It's like, gosh, I want to say it's like 20. I'm going to get this wrong. It's like 25 something. Anyhow, it basically says that it gives another, it provides for the fourth option. And basically what it says is that that a non-self-governing territory can agree on a different status, like a mutually agreed status with the administering power. It's just that it's rarely referenced because no one has really pulled it off in a way that does both, that satisfies the requirements for a full measure of self-government, but also recognizes a partnership. And it's just been more effectively done, more commonly done through either two independent nations having a diplomatic relationship with each other, through integration into the system as an equal, or through a compact of free association. Honestly, it very much represent. It's very similar to a compact of free association, and I think that's the reason why it is just not as, it's not referenced nearly as much as 1541 and 1514. But to answer your question, it's definitely possible. If you're asking why, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I was saying so for us to be able to kind of get it more streamlined, these three options are probably the best ones that we have to be able to get something done. But I think that I think the fourth one would be interesting to see exactly. I mean, nowadays, I think, with, being able to get a lot of more information in front of us, being able to, I don't know, maybe dissect other nations that have gone through this and see, is there a combination? Is there a hybrid? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I just want to get your opinion on that.
Well, I do think that I would say that I don't think that there's. I don't think we should limit ourselves. That's for sure. And so because I have that perspective, right, I think that the sky's the limit, and our imagination really is the true test, right? What is it that we imagine is the ideal scenario for Guam? And then, what is the best mechanism for that? I don't think that we should limit ourselves on what is possible or what has been done before. But that said, one of the things I think is the strength of using one of the three options is that we've kind of seen how they can be successful in different applications and how they have been unsuccessful as well. These are all kind of proven models. We have analysis of different nations that have pursued different options and that still have a relationship with their previous administering power or another. the way I look at it is that there, even within the one particular status of free association, right? There's no identical freely associated nation with the United States. The three of them all have the same status, but they're all kind of custom built for that nation and the relationship that that nation wants to have with the United States. And of course, what the United States is willing to negotiate to that end. You could argue that the compacts that were just signed recently are very different than the ones that were signed the 20 years prior, the original compacts. And, that's part of the political growth of the nation. I feel like that each nation has seen places in their compact improve because they had a higher opinion of themselves. They, after going through their first, 20 years of compact arrangement with the United States, I think a lot of them kind of realized, like, look, we have a lot more leverage than we thought we did 20 years ago. And especially now, you look at the way that Palau has behaved in their compact negotiations is very different than what they did the first go around. They've been a lot more open. And I can't say this is kind of on behalf of all Palauans, but at least the government of Palau has been clearly a lot more open to negotiating arrangements with the United States in regard to military use of their islands. There's a significant increase of military presence and military activity in the Palauan Islands today than there was just 10 years ago. And, that's debatable for the people of Palau. Some really love it. Some don't care for it. But regardless, that's a decision made freely and openly by their government, right? Which is a very different arrangement for Guam. So, I think that if Guam under any of these statuses provides us with the kind of agency and mobility that we need to defend our values and our interests, is there a fourth option that could also be legitimate? I can't say that there isn't. I think it's obviously there's a framework that makes it possible. Can we reach that agreement? I don't know. I mean, there's the United States government has not been, to be just completely blunt, the United States government I don't think has been very cooperative when it comes to recognizing our right to self-determination and determining a status. Like, I mean, just historically, the United States government has kind of asserted this idea that the fourth option should be status quo, which should just outright be unacceptable. And so, I mean, who knows? I wouldn't say that it's not possible, but I do think that it is beneficial when we see that there's not this kind of open cooperation or willingness by the U.S., body politic or Congress to say, yeah, we should absolutely just, let these guys do their thing, have their vote, and then honor that vote. I think if it was as cut and dry as that, then we would be on a path to effectuating the chosen status by now. But that's not where we're at. And so I think that having this framework internationally is helpful because it takes the conversation away from just being exclusively dealt with by Congress, where we're obviously weak. And it brings, another international perspective in. So now it's kind of just broadened the conversation, right? It's not like we've abandoned the congressional effort. I feel like we're still pushing on the federal government side. We're just adding the international perspective to this.
Yeah, and I think that, a couple of things there, kind of reading the historical behind all this, right? I think that there was probably a lot more momentum in the late 80s, early 90s. And, the status quo just kind of fell into this thing where everybody just kind of accepts it. And do you think, like, for example, if, even with the representative from the Virgin Islands who made the, she made the discussion, or she got up and said, we don't have any voting rights, why can't we have voting rights, right? Would that change our position if our congressmen, let's just say we can vote. Let's just say that there's a position where we do get a seat at the table. We're able to vote now. Right. And then the second one, the one that I'm concerned about, is the fact that we continue to have a mass exodus of people that are tomorrow descent leaving Guam.
Right.
And so what does that look like? Because, we have more influx of, if you look at the demographics in the last census, it's pretty eye-opening, right? Because,
it is, absolutely.
You have a huge mix now, right? So if I want to live here and this is where I want to die, and then all of a sudden the status changes, and then you say, oh, by the way, you're going to have to relinquish your U.S. passport, and then we're like, let me go back to the mainland then. I mean, there's so many different scenarios, and I think that, that's another huge discussion, because I think that, with the mass exodus, it's going to be very, whose voices are actually out there really, taking one side or the other, or choosing one of the three options, right?
Right.
So that's a huge concern too.
You're absolutely right, and this is why I feel personally, I feel like the part after the vote is the more exciting part, because no matter what status we choose, we have to negotiate what it's going to look like in the interim and the end state, right? And so, that's where all of these discussions will be had. Like, let's just say, for example, that Guam was to, if Guam was to choose, out of the three options, the only one that would retain or kind of logically, automatically retain U.S. passport is integration, right? If we become a state or we become fully integrated into the U.S. system, then that, will be largely unchanged. Now, if we were to become freely associated or independent, then, we'd have to determine a separate citizenship consideration, right? We become citizens of Guam, right. Similar to, let's say, Palau, right? Palau, the citizens of Palau have their determined citizenship within their nation. They also have their own passport. Their passport program is tied almost directly to the U.S. passport program. So their brown passport goes to essentially every destination that the blue one does. And that's, embedded in their agreement. So too does the FSM and the RMI, right? They both have their own passports, their own citizenship consideration, and they also have the same kind of, essentially the same travel arrangement and considerations that Palau does. And so, logically, if Guam was to become freely associated, I imagine that we would do something similar. Now, with the independent option, the Philippines is a good example, right? Philippines, they have their own citizenship. Of course, they also have their own passport. Different arrangement with the Philippines and the United States versus, say, one of the freely associated states and the United States. But, there are other places where the United States has agreed to dual citizenship. Or not the United States, but other nations have agreed to dual citizenship. So, I mean, it's not unprecedented. I do think it's unlikely that the United States in particular would extend dual citizenship to Guam. But Guam is also kind of unique, so I wouldn't say that it's off the table. I may think it's unlikely, but is it impossible? I don't know. I think that it just depends on our negotiation. But, again, that's the reason why I think that the negotiating piece is really the exciting one, because that's where, that's where we see the particular strength or even weakness of Guam moving forward. I wanted to just answer your previous question and reference the resolution that you were referring to. I just pulled it up. Is the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 2625. Now, this resolution on the Declaration on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations and Cooperation Among States. This, in regard to self-determination, this document recognizes the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. It says that the duty of every state is to respect this right in accordance with the provisions of the Charter. It further added that the establishment of a sovereign and independent state, the free association or integration with an independent state, or the emergence into any other political status freely determined by a people constitutes modes of implementing the right of self-determination. So to answer your question, that's what it is. That fourth option that you're referring to is any other political status freely determined by a people. And so, to technically answer your question, yeah, you're correct. Like the people of Guam could go into negotiations with the federal government and just say, okay, hey, we want to have a unique political status option. But that would still also require kind of a vetting through an act of self-determination, right? Let's just say we came up with this really unique, like knock it out the park kind of status, right? We developed all the framework for it. If that status was not adopted through a referendum by the people, then it could not be considered legitimate. And so that's what it would be, right? Is that we would have to choose that fourth option, and then we would have to go in and negotiate with the federal government to see if it's even doable. I think the reason why a lot of nations that have undergone this process have not taken that route is because it kind of adds another step in the journey. You got to go in, you got to do both anyway. You got to have the vote anyway, period. That's just what it is. That's the whole reason why the Organic Act of Guam cannot be considered a legitimate act of self-determination, despite the considerable support that the Organic Act received locally. There are a lot of people on Guam who were really advocated for the signing of the Organic Act, but it didn't go through a referendum. It didn't have a plebiscite, right? Which means then that the people of Guam ultimately did not choose it. It was still an act of Congress, not an act of self-determination. I don't think that it's impossible to come up with, kind of a fourth option. But in the same breath, I don't think that these three options are incapable of delivering to us a full measure of self-government and simultaneously allowing us to shape our local government in a way that is consistent with our values. And so, I feel like that's just my personal perspective on it. It's just kind of seeing what other nations have done successfully or unsuccessfully in the past and what the framework looks like for us moving forward. But hey, listen, Mr. Hermosa, I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I appreciate you tuning in and sharing your perspective. Have a great day. And I just totally got tuned in here with Mr. Hermosa. Thank you for the great conversation. I just blew right past my mark. It is now 12:02, and I got to get up out of here, guys. I got to go back to work and do the thing. Anyhow, I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. It was a great discussion. I'm really happy to be back in the seat and having the conversation with our community. We look forward to seeing you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. We'll be back here on Monday, 10 to noon for Challenge the Status Quo. Until then, I hope you all have a great week and keeping on. We'll see you next time. Adios.
KGUM FM. Daddy No. The talk of Guam is Wave 105 FM.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Matt Piper. At least 79 people are dead after powerful flooding saturates central Texas. Most are in hard-hit Kerr County, where many children are among the dead. That's from Mass at Notre Dame Catholic Church in Kerrville. Jose Gonzalez lives nearby.
I noticed a lot of kids, a lot of babies. I feel sorry for the parents.
Amid the prayers and well wishes, stories of survival. KHOU TV's Amanda Henderson has one man's story.
Through tears and shock, the family of 27-year-old Julian Ryan tells us the father, brother, and fiance died a hero. In the early Friday morning hours, floodwaters suddenly swelled into the home he shared with his fiance and mother in Ingram, close to the Guadalupe River.
And it just started pouring in. We had to fight the door to get it closed, and we ran back to the